corrections to the minutes? Hearing none, is there a motion?
I'll move to approve the minutes from the last meeting. Second.
There's been a motion made and seconded. All those in favor of accepting the minutes as amended, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, please say no. The motion carries. I'd like to turn the time over to the members of the public who are in attendance at our meeting tonight. I have Carol Burke Caldwell, Mary Selena, and Deb Frisch signed up to speak. Please take a seat at the table, and Jim's our timekeeper today. We'll fix it.
I'll go ahead. Carol Burke Caldwell, 2510 Augusta. You each have a packet I'm distributing. It's a letter to both this commission and the Civilian Review Board. Dear all, I'm providing you with copies of a February 2nd New York Times commentary by Michelle Alexander and copies of the New York Times February 11 letters page, writers who responded to the commentary. The commentary titled, Why Police Lie Under Oath, largely refers to alleged police untruths in New York City. However, as the saying goes that all politics is local, perhaps all policing is local also applies. Do not think that my drawing these materials to your attention comes from any anti-police beliefs on my part, for I very much agree with points in this commentary that recognize police are human, that we are all susceptible to making false statements. I bring these materials to your attention because it outlines some key factors behind why some police may lie, not offered as any excuse, but understanding and to address those possible pressures. The commentary outlines how federal grants, other funds sought by police agencies, could be behind this pressure on some police to ratchet up arrest totals to stretch the truth in order to win in court trials. Could this be in play in Eugene? Is there pressure put on our police to build those arrest numbers, to win those court trials, to secure more grants for EPD? I do not know, nor have I any reason to believe this is the case. But if this is occurring in other police jurisdictions, other cities, could it be happening here? Given the task before both the Eugene Police Commission and the Eugene Civilian Review Board, perhaps it would be helpful to broaden your awareness and request information regarding all grants sought and obtained by EPD. It could be revelatory and helpful for you to know. Let me emphasize that in my 34-plus months of volunteer court observings, I have watched many trials involving EPD officers. In the vast majority of trials, I've had no reason to believe police were not telling the truth. We are fortunate to have so many professional, highly ethical officers serving community. If there are incidents of police lying in court, it's surely rare. Do I believe it has occurred? Yes. Even when I felt this had occurred, however, I tried to judge not, for I wondered what unknown factors could have been behind this. Perhaps there are pressures put on our police to win in court at all costs, even ethical costs. Few of us, if we were in police shoes, might withstand similar pressures. Please request in-depth information regarding any and all grants sought and given to EPD. Certainly, grants are helpful for police departments, and it might be useful for you to have a full understanding on this. Thank you.
Next, I have Mary Selena.
Yes, hello, my name is Mary Salinas. I'm a spokesperson for the homeless. I've been doing this for 15 years. I'm a slow learner. I wish I had more time, and I wish I were brilliant. I read the New York Times. I see photographs of the policemen who responded to Newtown, and I read the terrible little statements, and they don't tell us very much about what they say. And I feel so terrible for the policemen, and I think, well, the policemen, they're just like us, and I love them, and they broke, and they're having PTSD, they're having nightmares. And see, I come from the population of people who are so hurt by the police, it's hard not to take up. And so, there you are, you're like us. And there you are, we're like you. The homeless, they don't go around kicking citizens to death. The citizens kick us to death. The homeless don't make child pornography. The homeless don't do gang rapes. The homeless stand on corners with signs, but you know, the homeless standing on corners with signs have scars on their heads because people throw things at them, and they spit at them, and they yell things at them. It's a very tough job holding a sign on a corner. It's like something you do not want to do. It's hard work. I want to try to tell you that we're okay, that we're human, that if we had shown up at Newtown, it would have hurt us very much too. And I want you to stop being afraid of us. Many of us have been hurt terribly, like none of you have been. Many of us have been crippled, broken, but we're not like that. And we're not child pornographers like the mission, and we're not gang rapists like the mission, and the mission only houses a couple hundred people, and you don't need them. There are thousands of homeless. You don't need the mission. I guess I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Deb Frisch.
I'd like to second the comments of my predecessors. The article in the New York Times about the pressure on police to commit perjury in trials in the New York Times was really excellent, and thank you for bringing that up, and thank you for bringing up the importance of compassion for the homeless. I don't usually think about what I'm going to say at the Eugene Police Commission for weeks in advance, but I've been thinking about this meeting since February 1st. I keep trying to think of how to put a Valentine's Day spin on something I want to talk about. It's not that easy. Most of the things I want to talk about involve accusing a public servant of a misdemeanor such as official misconduct or a felony such as coercion. I had a bunch of ideas. One idea was to think of the meanest things I could think of to say about various public servants and preface it with something like this. It's amazing that I feel safe enough to come to this meeting and say the things I'm about to say. At least one of you is armed with a Glock, and yet I'm as close to 100% sure as a person can be that nothing I could possibly say in here could put me at risk of physical danger. That got rejected because it uses Valentine's Day as an excuse to be meaner than I would be otherwise. That seems wrong. I was stuck. Time was running out. Then Saturday's mail arrived containing a response to a public records request to the Eugene Police Department. So luckily you're spared any more Valentine's Day commentary. It's kind of hard to talk about what I want to talk about EPD POM 901.1, 309, and 1102.2 without you being able to look at them. I'll put those comments and concerns in a letter to Chief Kearns if you're interested in. The punchline is that the letter ends with a request that the Chief publicly announce a target date for the completion of the Lexipol-based updating of the EPD POM that began on July 15th, 2009. July 2013 would be the target date. Finally, I have a few comments on the op-ed column in the February 12th Register Guard by Sheriff Turner and Chief Kearns. I'd like to commend the Chief and the Sheriff for penning such a well-written and logically reasoned commentary. Such columns are few and far between in the Register Guard. I especially appreciated the reference to the importance of the Forest Work Camp, Cahoots, and Human Services. I was impressed at how they tried to create empathy for crime victims by referring to their, quote, shock and vulnerability. A huge majority of the public will never have anything to do with criminals or the criminal justice system, and creating empathy for crime victims is a way to get everyone else to care about it. Anyway, the column is progressive, and it's evidence-based, and it's very impressive. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes our public forum. Thank you, all the members of the public who came and spoke today. We appreciate you taking the time. I'd like to turn the time over to the group for comments from chair and items from commissioners, and I'll go ahead and start with Jesse and Christine in a clockwise fashion.
Unmanned surveillance, drones, cameras above Broadway, small little flying vehicles. I think that in addition to cell phone and wiretapping abilities and more of the federal government law enforcement working with local police departments, I think these are conversations. It's a conversation that we need to have. Coming down the pipeline quickly is going to be federal grants looking at getting more surveillance equipment into the hands of local police departments. And we need to decide sooner rather than later, knowing that it's coming, what we want to do as a community. That's all I have.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I have a couple of items to share with the rest of the commissioners. I want to express my deepest disappointment in this group for not having the courage to speak up on behalf of those who come all the way this way to ask that the police commission will meet somewhere else except for here. If I understand this correctly, the last time we had a work plan, in fact, we wanted to find a way to how to respond to public comments. And as I've been keeping track of things, there's been several people who have come and asked that the police commission will meet somewhere else, including myself and the commissioners. This was to me an opportunity to, in fact, clarify and, in fact, validate that, in fact, there are other places that could work for these kind of meetings. The time that was presented in the minutes is unfortunate. I would have joined those standing the decision. The second item is on regards to domestic violence. Unfortunately, I think we had to either cancel or postpone because speakers didn't come. I continue to believe that that is an important subject to have this body to listen to. I forwarded to our chair a name of a person that has been working with not only domestic violence but also human trafficking. Her name is Clara Lindstrom. And as a courtesy to that professional, she had not been contacted in any way. I hope that this issue continues to be reviewed, and I am looking forward to see how the police commission is going to find ways to how to respond to the public comment. Believe me, coming all the way is one thing, but getting ready and knowing that they've been heard, that's a different story. Thank you.
Thank you, yes. Thank you all for indulging my leaving early tonight. I appreciate the change in agenda to allow a committee report. Thank you. I have my wife is in a production tonight, and it's Valentine's Day. You don't want to miss your way, so I'm going to have to leave. But I have been thinking lately, and for those of you who were at the meeting, and heard this already, I'm sorry, but I just have to repeat it because I've been thinking again, it was raised tonight again to me in my mind, that most of us who, one of the speakers mentioned, don't usually come in contact with the criminal justice system, and so we don't have to worry about issues like where's the money going to come from to house criminals and so forth, and keep us safe out here in the community. You know, most people go about their business every day and don't think about that, and that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing. But the problem that we have here is that the things that happen to us in our daily lives are done by a few, a very small percentage of society involved in crime that makes it unsafe for the rest of us to do things. So simple things like being able to get on a bus and give the driver a $5 bill and getting some change back, what we used to do years ago, you can't do anymore because bus drivers were robbed. So now we all have to carry exact change. There are so many things. That's just one example, one metaphor of what we have to do in life every single day, the way you have to get on an airplane now, the things you have to go through to get somewhere, that are impacted by just a few people. So everybody suffers for what a few people do. And I think that's the thing we have to keep in mind. There's this small minority that continues to impact how we live our lives. But to do nothing about that and to not have the measures that some people feel are draconian or over protective ensures that we will be in some way injured as a society and as individuals. So I think we're on the right course with protecting our people the best way we can do it, and whatever that takes. If you're innocent and you haven't done anything wrong, you have nothing to fear. That's my feeling, and I wanted to get that. Thank you, Matt. George?
I'm on the Civilian Review Board, and we had a good meeting on Tuesday night. One of the things that, of course, I'm a businessman, and I'm always looking for ways to save money, and I do know they spend money on that, but as I pointed out, it allows the people, in this last case, economically challenged people to be heard just like everyone else. So the review board is doing a very, very good job, and I look forward to working with everyone in this room. Thank you.
Okay, I guess first in response to Carol, there is a documentary called West of Memphis that will be arriving at the Bijou shortly. It is definitely worth watching. At the last policy meeting, it was clear that things needed to be said. There's 3 minutes worth. The homeless had money, they would be welcome in Eugene. They don't, so people want them gone. Enter EPD, a complaint-driven, can-do team of good guys dedicated to solving community problems. Sadly, the only tool the police have is punishment. Can punishment end homelessness? Let's test this idea. Throw them in jail. When they get out, they're still homeless. Give them fines they can't pay, still homeless. Chase one away, more arrive from other cities also criminalizing them. Punishment does not work. It is expensive, it makes the situation worse, and it increases crime. I want this group to stand up in front of the city council and say the police have been given a war they cannot win. If we won't do this, Chief Kern should, or the police union, or the Downtown Public Safety Zone Committee, or the newly forming Homeless Commission. Somebody needs to put us on a road to workable solutions. Why are the homeless homeless? Each subgroup has its reasons. First, the mentally ill. Before Reagan, they were housed and fed. The system badly needed reform, but defunding it and dumping the mentally ill onto the streets did not fix the problem. There are also veterans suffering from PTSD. Street kids come in two flavors. Of those kicked out of their families, many are unwed mothers with kids. I have been told the film Juno was unrealistic because, quote, a real father would have beat her up and thrown her out. Also kicked out of their families, the fraction of homosexual street kids is more than double that found in the general population. Of kids who left their family by choice, most were molested or beaten. These kids decided sleeping in the cold and the rain, suffering derision and harassment was preferable to staying with dysfunctional parents. The American family is under assault from the business world. Parents are less available to their kids and are far more stressed. Extended families have mostly vanished. Family abuse and neglect creates addicts who will endure any consequence to medicate their internal turmoil. The book, In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, examines this. I gave a copy to Chief Kearns. I will talk about those dropped off the bottom economically during my closing comments. Made a copy of this for Bob. Thank you.
Might be a little briefer. Welcome, George, to your first meeting. And happy Valentine's Day to everybody. And that's it.
Sure, I'll just fill in the blanks on a couple of things. Carol, I don't think we have any grants that are driven by or dependent on the numbers of arrests that we make. And I also believe that it wouldn't take very much work to produce a summary of the grants that we have and their purpose, so if the commission asks for that, I don't think it would be much trouble to grant it, and I can look into that. And then we are behind on completing PALM policies because of a series of retirements that we had the last couple of years. We're having trouble keeping up on them, and I'm hoping that this July we'll be able to put in place a better, the number of people that we need in order to get things done at a better rate. But we are still moving forward on them, but not at the pace that we need.
Claire?
Hi. Apologies again for being late. My schedule is just crazy, and also I was full of apologies for missing January's meeting. And I don't have any other comments besides apologies for missing meetings. And if our next meeting is on the date that I have on my calendar, unfortunately I'll have to be out of town for work that night, so I won't be here for March's meeting either, but I will stay up to date and again, hope to be more engaged going forward.
I'd like to also welcome George to our group, and I was pleased to hear that our city council representatives will be Claire Spread and Mike Clark again. So that's great to know. That gives us some continuity. And that's all I have. I would like to indulge the group to move the agenda around so that all of our members are here for all the members that are here for Bob needs to give his committee update on the policy screening committee, and also item number 8, community values discussion, probably is better had with all the folks in the room, although Caitlin probably could introduce that topic better than I might be able to, having not had the passion for that one that she has. So if I can indulge the group to have committee reports go next, that's what I would like to do with the agenda. Is that okay with everybody? Is there any objections? Okay. So Bob, go ahead with the policy screening report, please.
Thank you. We held our meeting last Tuesday, and we had a couple of speakers. We didn't have a lot of speakers, but again, we had people who had issues. I felt very pleased to hear what they had to say, because there was some agreement on some things, and also I appreciated the perspective that I got from a couple of people, and they raised a couple of good points. And I think we had a really good discussion at the end of the meeting when people joined us at the table. We began to talk more about, sometimes the back and forth is better than just stating your position and somebody else stating their position. So we got into the policy for the trespass ordinance and trespass letter, and we weren't able to complete it because it was, and I knew it would be a big item on the agenda, allowed more time for it and so forth, but we never got through it. So I suspect next month we will complete that part of the policy review. I hope to have a report for you then. Thank you.
And Joe, do you have a report for the Public Outreach and Resource Committee?
Sure. Briefly, we talked about three things. The police union questionnaire concerning their contact with the commission, and we're still trying to arrange a time to meet up with the president of the police union, so that's kind of on hold. The U of O forum seems to have been preempted by this arming the U of O police force. And so there is a meeting on the 26th, and the three of us that were there, Jim and Tamara and myself, intend to go to that and possibly make some contacts about looking into what we might do with the interest of talking to students about the relationship with the police and the community. And then the State of Public Safety Forum looks like it's moving ahead. We'll hopefully finalize a date and location at the next meeting, and that's about it. Anything else you want to add?
No other questions, Jesse?
What are the details on that 26th meeting?
I don't have that with me. I can find out for you. Maybe the thing to do would be to email out to everybody on the commission the time and place of these meetings.
There was an article in the Register Guard, and there
It's
was
that one.
more than one date.
Yeah.
I was just
There
wondering.
was some discussion dates. I'm unclear, that was announced in the Register Guard. I'm unclear on the difference between those two items, but there were several dates for each, and we can,
Let's email it to the group.
yeah, we'll figure out what that is.
Email.
But the focus of those meetings is to talk about arming UOPD. Okay, thank you for the committee updates. Are there any other questions for either of the committee chairs on the work of those committees? Okay, if not, we'll look forward to possibly having some policies to review from the Policy Screening Committee in our March meeting. Thank you for indulging that agenda change. Next, I would like to talk about item number 8, if there are no objections to moving that item around on the agenda as well, so Bob can participate in that item because he is the chair of the and this item is in regard to some of the work that committee is doing. Are there any objections to that change? My understanding of the topic on the agenda, and again, I apologize, I was not as prepared as Caitlin would have been to introduce this topic. This got on the agenda for two reasons. One is that it did get one vote in our work plan retreat last year, which we haven't hit too many topics that only got one vote. Usually the topics that we've seen on our agendas are ones that received more votes than that. But also in regard to Bernadette Conover's comments in the January Police Commission meeting, her parting comments about how the police commission does its work on policies, and how that work might be valuable or could be more valuable for the police department. I mean, when we're working on the police department's policies, we want to make sure that our work is effective in giving them the feedback that they need, the chief, the feedback that he needs to make decisions on policy changes. Did I capture that pretty well? Okay. So, I guess one of the things that Bernadette had advanced the notion of, and that's how the policy screening committee has been doing its work, is instead of wordsmithing policies, as in my, I think, 6.5 years on the commission, I have seen it done from one end of the spectrum to the other by the police commission. I have seen a tremendous amount of 11 months worth of wordsmithing the taser policy, and don't know if that's the most valuable way for the group to do its work, or if the way that the policy screening committee is doing its work today, which is looking at the overarching really themes of the policies and saying, if a word is important, that's fine, and we can put that in the notes, but more focusing on the spirit and the gist of the policy and why something in there maybe needs to be changed. We've done minority and majority reports before on policies. The chief's made comment in the past, but I would like to hear from the chief when we go around the table as well about how it's most valuable to him, because he's the ultimate decision maker on ECD policy, to receive work from this group, and what's the most effective way for us to convey our thoughts and the reasons why we think that something needs to be stated a certain way in a policy, or why something needs to be included or not included in a policy. So I don't know if you want to go first, Chief, or if we can just do a round robin.
Whichever you please.
Let's go ahead and go around the table this way, the same way we did for items from commissioners, and then that will give you the opportunity to hear what other folks say. And then, so is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I've got no initial comment on that.
You're on that committee, Jesse?
Yeah.
Okay. And how do you feel about how the work's currently doing, or how the group's currently doing its work?
I worry about getting away from wordsmithing. Everybody likes to use wordsmithing like it's a bad phrase. It's not necessarily. Words are important, and they do manage to help achieve consensus when there's different ideas about what things should be. Then again, several times I think we might have worked to achieve consensus to create something that doesn't really say what anybody wanted, or that wasn't clear. We've not been doing it the new way for very long yet, and ultimately I think we need to see what happens. The chief, the staff that comes to the PSRC meeting is good about taking in the comments that we have, coming back the next month with changes, that having had the time to reflect on what we said, I think, without trying to make a decision right there in the confines of an hour-and-a-half or 2-hour meeting, and probably come up with some better stuff than we might have had we been trying to wordsmith every word.
Thank you. And Carlos?
I have been a member of the PSRC committee since I began my work with the Police Commission. I too have seen my share of different ways of doing things. There was a point in which we actually literally came up with 2 policies, and that didn't seem to be as helpful for the work that we were trying to do. At the same time, I also noticed that there was obviously importance of those voices and suggestions that hopefully ultimately not only the chief but also the city council manager hopefully will benefit from. I am pleased and I am happy to continue to say that from the beginning, making or helping make these changes into that was more of a collaborative process. I still stand behind it, but this is still in the infancy. It's only been several months that we started doing this process. At the same time, I'm a little bit confused, Madam Vice Chair, because the agenda talks about community values discussion, but it seems to me that the discussion is mostly around that committee. And although I was kind of confused at first, because we had at least a couple of discussions in the Police Commission and also the PSRC. And so I wonder what we didn't cover. Sometimes when things come back, that means that obviously not everything was vetted through. And of course, I'll take this as another opportunity, of course, for the work that we are doing at the PSRC, for it to work, and I mean, for currently, the way we're approaching the work into bringing values and what the sentiment and perspectives, and hopefully EPD staff captures that and reflects it on the policy, and then we get to see it, and then see whether or not we were heard, and hopefully move forward with the policies. For that to happen, it has to be in a full circle. We present those perspectives, the community values, if you will, and then the EPD hopefully says, this is what we've heard, here are the changes we made, and now if we go to the next policy. It's not working like that just yet. It has the potential to work that way, I believe, but I would not hesitate in that committee to go back and make specific suggestions on language, if in fact we need to do that. My other concern is that, are we asking the chief to tell us how to do the work at the PSRC? Or are we having an open discussion about how we're going to be doing the work to be able to tell the chief, was this helpful for you? I can see both values, but I want to be careful about keeping that independence. That being independent has come up several times about the work of the Police Commission. Thank you.
Bob?
What's happening is a good process. I see our committee as advise and consent. I like to think we advise the chief on issues that we think are very important to the community, and we advise him of the changes we wish to make to the policy. And I would think that his consent or non-consent is an indication of him taking our advice, at least listening to what we have to say. So I think having the input from staff is critical. We wouldn't get anywhere if we didn't have someone to explain the policies and what we do. I think having the input from the community is critical. Their values are being reflected. People who come to the meeting and speak, and I've seen this happen many times at our committee meetings, that we amend policy from the committee to go to the commission, to the chief, based on what has been brought up at a meeting. Now, that's not every time, but I have seen us change things. And we do almost always have a word here or there in the policy that we think might help by adding a word or taking out a word. So I think there's careful deliberation. I think we're reflecting what community values we have available. But I also think that as a result of reviewing these, we're finding so few objections because the policies have time-worn and well-thought-out policies that already reflect the values of the community, or they wouldn't be in place. If they had been, there'd been too many complaints, too many problems with them, they would have been amended by now. So we're getting a lot of things, with the exception of new technology, as was mentioned earlier, that have already been tried and true and not cause us to have to deal with a lot of changes to them. The ones that are causing problems or having to be reviewed very clearly are the ones that people are objecting to the most. And I think we're spending the proper amount of time on those policies. We didn't try to rush anything through last month, and nor would I do that this month. If there's concern and it needs discussion, it takes time. So, it's not amount of the quantity. I mean, heard mentioned earlier about the number of policies that you crank out in a year. That's not what's important. It's the quality of what you bring to the table and finally end up with as the end product. So I think we're doing okay.
Yeah, I think this is a good conversation to have, and even though it might focus on the policy screening committee, because that's kind of where the rubber hits the road in some ways, I think it's applicable to any of the committee work. And I think it's been a kind of a challenge. I mean, I was involved in one role with the TASER policy review, and that really got down into the nitty-gritty, which maybe it needed to, but I could see how, from a commission's perspective, that is very challenging, and challenging for the chief as well, because things get very technical. So I'm encouraged by what I'm hearing from folks who are part of that committee, just using that as one example of the policy screening review, I think the role of the commission is to take in the community's values and try to see how that's reflected in policy or in how we do community outreach or any of the other things that this commission might be responsible for. And I think, you know, the ideal would be that we wouldn't have to get into the weeds, that would be able to communicate the values at a higher level, see those reflected, as Juan Carlos was saying, in this kind of relationship of the staff taking that, trying to embed it into the details of the policy, getting to review it again, and if it still seems like it's not there, then maybe getting down into more detail. But I think we will find places, and we saw this with the TASER policy, where some of what the community is trying to impose on the policy is at odds with what the chief feels is important for law enforcement. And so I think sometimes we will still find ourselves in that kind of place where because the chief is the final arbiter on what goes into the policy. So I'm encouraged by the conversation. I'm also encouraged that the screening policy review committee is kind of shifted a little bit in terms of how they're approaching that work. It sounds, I think, like a positive development, even though it still needs time to mature. So.
George, sorry to put you on the spot. I know you don't really, haven't been to any of those meetings, but understand if you wish to comment, you're more than welcome to. If not, you can pass.
I think I'll pass. I'm here to listen for the first few.
Thank you. Joe?
Yeah, I guess my time of sitting around and listening is probably ended. Okay. The way I sort of see this whole community value thing is that it requires specific examples. For example, the trespass letter policy is now under review, and I find myself largely in favor of that. However, the issue is, how do we prevent that from being abused? In general, of the policies that I've read, and thanks to Carter, I did get a whole set of the ones that are public. And I've been kind of going through them a bit at a time. My impression is that if we reduce the number of words in the policies, that they would read much more cleanly. They would be more understandable. That would be, I think, overall a good thing to do. This is supposed to be a community values discussion, and our community, like the rest of this country, is fairly polarized. And so the question comes down to, how do we find middle ground versus, maneuvering to win or lose on the particular topic. There are now open seats on this committee, and we have not talked about that for a while. That troubles me. One of the things that we might want to, it's not in the work plan, but since the Ninth Circuit Court ruling that actually caused the city to have to reimburse some homeless for the stuff that was picked up and hauled off to the landfill. That's a policy, the one about shutting down homeless sites, might be something we might want to put on the agenda and start looking at. But again, just to reiterate, I think that a lot of this community values thing really is not so much a general discussion as a issue-by-issue discussion.
Well, it seems that the policies are coming out very, very slowly. Hearing how the changes that have been made and how the workflow is kind of going now, I see value in that. Being able to add the values and having it comments from the committee members and having it going back to be rewritten and come back with a better version, hopefully, I think is very valuable. Better to get it right the first time than have to mess around with it or make some errors. I think that's a good way to go about it. I think making sure that it gets reviewed correctly and it goes through more than just one review in one session, maybe of looking at it and hammering it out and saying we're done, but letting it go back and having rewritten with the values in it, I think is a good idea. So I'd like to see it. It sounds like it's still in its infancy a little bit, and still some struggles and still some getting used to the the flow, but I think there's some good value there, and I look forward to seeing the final results as the policies start flowing in just to look at. Thank you.
So, it's hard for folks that weren't on the commission or the committee that worked on TASER policy to understand what I mean when I say wordsmithing. I don't mean that sometimes one word is not important as a modifier. It can add a lot of meaning or muddle meaning. I'm not talking about a word here or there. I'm talking about 11 months of wordsmithing. So for those of you that weren't working on that policy, I don't want you to misunderstand that I'm talking about sometimes the word shall or may or will or should are important in the terms of the policy and what that means. But looking at every single word and needing every single word for every single word in the policy for the group to reach agreement on is what's happening in that case. And less the focus on making sure that the values of the policy were the overriding work of the commission. And so, just speaking for myself, that's not what I meant, and I want you to misunderstand what I mean when I talk about that. I think that in either event, where the group cannot reach consensus on something in a policy, I think it's vitally important for the comments of the both sides to explain their position. That becomes even more challenging given the staffing that we no longer have at those meetings, because we have had we had the luxury of Bernadette taking minutes, although that wasn't the ideal situation. I don't know who took minutes in the last policy screening committee, Bob, because I wasn't there. Unfortunately, I got held over at work. So that makes it especially challenging to capture those kinds of comments. But I think that's the most important thing for me when their agreement can't be reached, and somebody thinks that that's important, that word change is important, or that sentence is important to either include or not include. I think that's important to capture and say, and have the person's comments that feels differently about that captured. So staffing is one thing that nobody at the table talked about, and so that's something that we will struggle with in the group, having to have a participating member taking minutes and trying to rely on that person to capture those comments correctly. So that's, I guess, my main point on the matter, and I'd like to hear from the chief if you want to contribute anything to the conversation, or you can pass.
No, I'd be happy to. It helps for me to know what led to language changes when you depart from Lexipol's boilerplate. It helps to know what drove the change. Whenever we take on a new project, and it could just be a new document or a program or an initiative, we'll begin by asking what the objective is that we want to achieve, and then as we work our way through the project or the program or the initiative, we refer back to those initial 2 or 3 objectives and ask if we're meeting those at the decisions we're making. So I presume that if a committee you don't have objectives, I'll bet individually you do. And then I'm remembering back to the proposed TASER policy, and there were some things in policy that I felt were inappropriate for policy. And it helped me to have the discussion with the police commission to hear what led to those, because I think sometimes those express fears, things that you hope will never be done with the TASER, rather than what the intent of the TASER was in that particular case. So those fears can often be addressed through other means, either through training or equipment, those kinds of things. And of course, now that I brought that back up, I don't remember exactly what the language was, but occasionally I've seen that happen. But it does help for me to hear the legislative intent, because it helps me to think through how I might be able to include the intent in a way that's more appropriate for the professional audience the document is intended to guide.
Thanks. Okay, so I have Juan Carlos, Jesse, and Bob in the queue. Juan Carlos?
So I realized that you wanted to focus on PSRC because obviously we that's what we do. We get those policies vetted and hopefully reflect the values that I guess people are talking about. The other component of what I think it needs to be captured here of the work of that committee happens to be the community dialogue. And I am actually glad, as Bob mentioned, that we have had people coming in and share some perspectives, and I think that if you're looking for overall framework, and if not expectations, I don't think you get into that point, but at least share how the PSRC does this work to hopefully be considered by other committees, as it has to be at least a more similar approach to capturing those community values that they seem to be talking about. The chief just mentioned something that was very important, and that is that he talks about, he wants to know what led to language changes and what was behind the suggestions or something. And I think that's something that I hope that you consider asking every time, especially when there's different expectations. But in my mind, in order to do that, you have to have the ability to, in fact, capture how those meetings were conducted, who said what, how did we arrive to the decision. You know, even Vice Chairwoman Miller talked about resources. So at some point, we're going to have to talk about those resources because it's going to benefit you. You're going to end up with the product, but you're not going to know that 2 or 3 people had some intense conversations or things that you might benefit from. So that's going to have to be a part of the process. You also talked about the intent, Chief, and I think I applaud you for that. It's important. But the one thing that hasn't been spoken about is the impact. The impact both in the community, but also the impact back to officers. So if we're going to talk about those values, then it has to be a part of this. So in capturing the work of PSRC in this case, all of that has to be considered. I'm still behind. I'm very proud and take a little bit of credit for establishing a conversational type by including the chief in our meetings and having access to him and give him a chance to talk. I think that's also part of it. The full circle that I talked about earlier on the policies, you know, there's been a couple of times that we saw it only once, and the next thing we know it's been presented to the police commission, because some of them need to happen that way. I don't expect that will happen every time. As Jim Gardner said, you know, hopefully we'll have a chance to look at things 2 or 3 times. But again, as long as we see that staff is capturing the sentiment and the values of the group, I think we're going to do fine.
Jesse?
Thank you for your ideas and yours, Chief, about, it's going to change how if I take minutes again in the future, what I capture. Those are good points about getting the intent down. And I will say, on this resources issue, it was hard to take minutes, listen, and participate. And that'll be clear when we see the minutes that it took. And maybe on the committee we need to do, and all of the committees need to do a good job of lining up the 2 different, if there's different views, pointing that out, calling it out. Instead of we just have good conversations. It's a smaller group, so things flow more freely than they do here and move quickly, and you realize we've been talking for 10 minutes and I didn't write down anything, but everybody's had something to say that wasn't necessarily in alignment. I think as we talk about community values, because the PSRC has entered this trench where they're just going to be plowing through policy, a set bunch of policies for an indeterminate amount of time into the future. There's no vehicle for taking on new things. And Chief, you mentioned that the police departments, you do have new initiatives, and you'll go out and look for objectives. It would be, I'm just kind of thinking out loud here, so grain of salt, but maybe in the reports, if you could report to us more about what's going on. I've got no idea if the EPD has ever considered whether they're going to invest or look for grants for aerial surveillance. Maybe that conversation's been had. It would be nice if it has, to have the police commission know. And maybe it's not necessarily that you're going to come and ask what our opinion is, but then the commission might decide that's something that we should take up and talk about and make suggestions to you about.
Okay, Bob?
Yes, Joe brought up a good point that I meant to bring up with the chairperson. She's not here tonight, who it was, but I think by the bylaws, it's up to her to make that change, but we do need to change one position. We need to move Commissioner Hamilton off the committee. As some of you may know, she is very busy in her personal life right now, and made one meeting last year and has not been to the last 9 or 10 meetings. So it creates a problem in that it still gives us a 5-person committee without, when somebody shows up, we don't have enough for a quorum to conduct business officially. So that position needs to be, and I would love to hear from people who want to volunteer to take that place. Also, I don't know if Mr. Rhodey will be taking, necessarily jumping right into Bernadette's place, but we have that vacancy that came up last month when she switched to back to the police commission. So from the police commission to the review board. So I think we need to, ask for volunteers at least to take care of that position. And again for Commissioner Hamilton.
What position is Bernadette?
It's the PSRC Policy Screening Review Committee. She was on the committee, and so when she left, it created a vacancy.
Committee recommends the chair appoint someone.
Well, on the,
Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. I didn't mean to have a side conversation. I can't remember. I thought we made a recent change in the bylaws about how committee members were replaced or new folks were put on committees. I can't remember what we had to change. We need to refer back to the actual bylaws to see if we changed something, unless somebody has a really clear, 100% sure recollection about that.
well,
Bob.
I did ask Carter about this about 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
What the policy she went through, and it looks like it's up to the chair to replace.
Nominations by the committee, which
Nominations by the committee and confirmation by the full commission. Is that right?
Okay.
That's my recollection. The
That's what I
committee
thought, too.
nominates, the chair appoints.
Right.
Okay.
Yes. Oh, the chair of the commission appoints, not the chair of the committee?
No.
Okay.
Chair of the commission.
That's my recollection as well.
Okay.
Okay.
So then we'll need to discuss that on the next month's agenda.
We have 2 positions.
If you're interested in that position, can you please let Bob, as the chair of that committee, know, and then can we make sure that gets on the agenda for that
Correct.
next committee? Okay, good. Are you done, Bob? Sorry.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Claire?
So just in response to what Jesse was saying about the challenge of trying to participate and take notes, I think it's great that that committee has got a dialogue going, that can't interfere with trying to take notes. So just one technique would be, if you realize, we've just been chatting, maybe just reiterate, here are the main points I got from what everyone said, if I missed anything, so there's a way to check back in with the group to make sure you've captured what people want reflected in the minutes in terms of, and then I think anytime we're approaching a policy, whether a new one or an old one, or we're talking about how we're going to do community outreach, I think, just as the chief said, you set what are your goals for this particular conversation or this review. I think maybe at the outset kind of vetting what are the community values that we're trying to bring forward here, whether it's from you personally or what you've heard from public input. That could be setting the stage for the conversation about whatever the particular topic is, to help us kind of ground it back in that idea that we're here in theory to reflect, to keep the community values there as the police do their work. And just as a side note, if the chief was thinking of getting new surveillance technology, I really hope he would come to this commission and vet that here. That would be pretty important, I think, at least from my perspective.
Okay. And I have myself next in the queue. I did want to say that I do appreciate that, that the chief and the police auditor I know have made changes to policies when they need to be made for risk management reasons or because it became obvious through the complaints that the policy needed to be changed. I'm grateful for the opportunity as a police commission member to work on policies, but I'm glad that they're not waiting on us to make those changes because that would not be probably the best way to do that. So I don't know if everybody here knows that changes do get made to policies and they don't always get made through the police commission. They get made otherwise as well. So if there's no further comment on that, that concludes the comments on that topic. Anybody else wishing to speak, Joe?
Yeah, I would actually be interested in one of those two seats that I guess are open.
Okay, then I would like to get back on track with our agenda as it was published and have the chief's report next. Chief, are you ready?
I am. No, you're fine. You'll forgive me for stating the obvious, but the police department, the entire city is looking at a $6 million budget gap in this next year.
I didn't want to talk about that.
And regardless of the outcome of an election in May, the city is reducing its expenses by another $1 million, or by $1 million this next fiscal year. And the police department is included in that. So we're still reducing our spending. And the concept of adding more staff to a committee is, it would be very, very difficult to do right now. Okay. The mouse the only way to advance. It's always when you want to use it.
There you go.
All right, thank you. Okay, the downtown public safety substation has gotten started, and we've moved our team in down there. If you haven't seen it, it's in the LCC building, and very pleased with the space. Looks like we could use a couple more computers because when the officers are overlapping, we have too many officers needing to write reports and not enough computers. So probably in the long run, we'll be able to deal with that eventually. And it puts them in the right place. Instead of having to commute back here during their shift, they can stay down there. And right now, it looks like it's going to be just fine. We had a pretty good recruitment. It's been a long time since we've seen 428 applications in a single recruitment process. There were, as you can see the numbers there, 65 candidates of color, and the 34 women is more than we've ever seen in a single process. So that's good to see. We're working diligently to add more people of color and more women to our staff. These are the things that I have done in the last, the community events that I've done in the last month or so. Southtown Rotary had their monthly lunch here in this room, and then we gave them a tour of the building. Sponsors, the reentry program that is partly funded by state dollars, county dollars, and donations, is celebrating their 40th anniversary, and they invited me to be one of the faces on the video that they're putting together for the dinner that they have on March 16th. Fundraising dinner on March 16th, which I'll be attending with my lovely wife, Joan, and Carter and John Hawley. And then the What Works conference in Portland was a presentation on the governor's criminal justice plan for the next biennium. It's an evidence-based plan that endeavors to get have fewer people in prison, more people supervised or housed locally. And then we had the first half of the gang symposium on January 12th. The KVAL interview was about gang symposium and the difficulties that we were having with jail shortages at the time. There was a group that produced a film called Heroes Behind the Badge that raises money both to pay for the production of the film and for the National Law Enforcement Memorial, and I attended that. There was Latino Leadership, I think it's Latino Leadership of Lane County?
Latino Leadership Forum.
Forum, okay.
Yeah.
I do have it right there. There were a number of speakers, our own Juan Carlos, Andrea Ortiz, Dr. Charles Martinez, Jim Garcia, and Peter Sorensen. Did I miss anybody? Seems like there might have been, I don't remember who the MC was, or who's that?
It was Philip Carrasco.
Okay. It was a very interesting forum about developing leadership in Lane County within the Latino community. And then the Lane County public hearing on the possibility of a measure, and on January 29th, that was several weeks before they took a vote. I was the speaker at the Emerald Valley Rotary. The Blacks in Government had their annual banquet. I enjoyed the Polar Plunge. That's a Special Olympics fundraiser. It's exhilarating. I did a ride-along with Patrol, which is always fun. And I went downtown with the downtown bike team. I'm always hearing concerns about how trespass and prohibited camping are enforced in the downtown core. So took a tour of the places where enforcement is typically done. Got the first-hand explanation from officers and the sergeant work there. I'm on the U of O Police Chief Search Committee, and I didn't participate in the campus forum because it conflicted with a council meeting, but Captain Carl Durr did that, and they're having 3 forums with students and staff about arming the members of the police department on the campus. And then a few things that happened this month. There was a standoff on a street off of River Road where a man had a roommate, a woman, who suffered from a mental health condition. She armed herself with a pistol that she stole from his room. She fired the pistol some point during the night. He called the police, and we ended up using tear gas to get her out and get her into custody and put her in a safer place. I believe she ended up in the Johnson unit that night. She did ultimately end up in the Johnson unit, if not that night. And then you might remember the story of the 2 men who got in their car near campus to discover that there was a robber hiding in the back seat, told them he had a gun, had them drive around town to get some things, and then they finally attacked him when they pulled into a store near Coburg Road here, and he escaped from them in the end, and he was captured by one of our canine units. We hold training regularly for crime prevention, and we had some training for the landlords. I think we had room for 75 or so, and more than 100 people showed up, so we're putting on another training for them. We had a rash.
Good outreach on that one.
Pardon me?
Good outreach on that.
Yeah.
As long as you don't have a narcotics guy talk again, they should have some kind of feedback on that.
So they should have
The narcotics guy was all over the board. He talked. Yeah, so.
Okay.
It would be nice to have some.
It's good to know.
I was there.
Okay. There was a sudden rash of 5 commercial burglaries in West Eugene. I think we've found an explanation for that. I can't tell you what it is right now, but I'm hoping that we'll be able to ultimately resolve that. There was a man probably in a mental health crisis on an Amtrak train we arrested for disorderly conduct, and I think 20-some charges of arson. He was lighting some things on fire while the train was traveling across the country. There was a bicycle vehicle crash on Fox Hollow about 7 a.m. on a weekday morning where the driver turned left into a bicycle who was lawfully going down Fox Hollow in the bike lane. Everybody survived, but another example of how, while in our cars, we can't be too careful. The bicyclist was doing everything he's supposed to do. And then there was a suspect in a first-degree assault who we were looking for. This was just a press release that we put out. We did put him in jail at one point. He was released shortly after that and didn't appear in court, so we asked for the public's help to find him again. He was arrested. And then similarly with a sexual abuse suspect. We had a rash of sex abuses near campus in the West University area where a man was sneaking up behind women and grabbing them. And we tracked that down, made the arrest, and he was released shortly after he was put in jail also. And then the crime that we've had in the last couple of weeks, the last month or so, is following what's becoming a typical pattern for us. This area that you see here is what we call part of Beat 5, but this the area that's outlined is just a portion of it. The far right side of each of these maps, this is exactly the same area on the left as it is on the right. The far right side is essentially the railroad yard along Bethel Road, and then the top is Royal, excuse me, if I get that right. Is that Royal?
Barger.
Barger, okay, you're right, Barger, and then on the bottom is Roosevelt, and on the far left is North Terry. And we have, for the last couple of months, seen a pretty persistent pattern of thefts from vehicles. Those are the green icons. Residential burglaries, which are the white and blue icons, and then some auto thefts. And you'll see a little more about auto thefts here. And then what we do is we, every week we identify the part of town that we think we need to focus the most attention on. And then the data on the bottom there, 21 arrests and CLCs, 19 uniform traffic citations and other citations, 17 field interviews, and so on. Those represent the effort that went into policing in that area, and then we compare the area of concern the previous week to the area of concern this week, and we're hoping that our effort will result in a reduction of those crimes. In this case, crime went up, and I think it's because some crook is working very hard in that area to steal things. Not one, but a number of them probably. Okay, and then this is the citywide look from the last couple of weeks, and crimes kind of cluster in typical areas. This is a lot of this is downtown, but mostly West University area, which is where we see a lot of car break-ins. And then we're seeing some trend here towards South Eugene. This is Kins Row neighborhood. We usually have a handful of crimes that occur there. And when Kins Row is sort of a closed neighborhood. You know, there are about 4 ways in and out of it. But once you're in there, you either belong there or you don't. So when we do patrols through there to prevent crime, it's pretty effective. It's a big commitment because it's so far away from everything else. But when we do regular patrols in there, crime pretty much goes away. And then there is a man with a mental health condition that if you drive through this area, Coburg Road and Beltline, you see him there. He is homeless. He usually wears dark clothing. He's got a full beard, and he regularly breaks into cars out here. We've arrested him for it, and he admits to it, and then we'll put him in jail. He really needs mental health care more than anything else. But there isn't good care for people like him, unfortunately, right now. And then this area is the Roosevelt, the Barger, Bethel, Terry area there. Okay, would you mind? And then the 4-week trend for the city, we've had 84 residential burglaries, 19 commercial burglaries, and the stolen car rate is going up for some reason. And that usually means that somebody isn't in jail or somebody moved to town and they're just committing a lot of crimes. And
Do you have any specs on the cars that are, what kind of cars are stolen?
yeah, they're usually 90s series Toyotas and Hondas. It's the most typical. And there's others, but rarely is it a modern vehicle that has the security measures that most new
And the
cars.
car clubs are preventing those from happening?
We've never had a car stolen that had a car club installed on the steering wheel. We have had them stolen where there's a car club in the car, not on the steering wheel. And then on the east side, this is where the property crimes happen on the east side. They're downtown and in West University. We'll just go on. for the mayor. Let's see. And then this is something that we're analyzing every week now because we've had so many stolen cars in West Eugene. You can see in beat 5, which is a big beat. It's bigger than it probably ought to be. But there's been 21 cars stolen so far this year just in this area here. That's a pretty high figure. And then what we're really curious about is where they're recovered, where we find them. There's often a house where the thieves live where they're recovered. We can see there's a cluster of recovered vehicles here. This is Bethel and Whitaker. There's a cluster up here. So we need to find out where the person is living that's driving the stolen car there, getting out and going to wherever it is they either live or stay. Okay. We're on beat 5, and then the analysis, just to remind you, this is the area. Crime analysis unit says the burglaries happen between 6 and 3, Monday through Friday. So that's when we need to be patrolling that area. This is how they're getting in. They don't have to force their way in. There must be unlocked doors and windows. They're getting into sheds, that kind of thing. Stolen property, these things. Stolen cars are happening Sunday through Wednesday, and then Saturday during all hours of the day and night. So that's really hard to focus an effort on that.
How many cars were stolen last month in January?
I don't know January, but so far this year, I think the number was 21.
21.
In that beat. So maybe we can go back that slide.
I have an article due in the paper tomorrow on
Okay.
information.
35 this year.
35, okay.
February 8th to February 4th was 35. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And we're having Cheryl Joyner is our training coordinator. She works in the second chambers, and she watched how the fire department had a camp for women who might be interested in becoming firefighters. So she thought she'd give it a try to do the same thing for women who may have an interest in that. Women who compete to become police officers struggle sometimes with the physical fitness test, the police officer physical agility test, POCAT. And it's all technique. Yeah, I mean, you have to have the endurance to get through the test, but the strength usually comes down to technique. You don't need superhuman strength, obviously, to do this. And so this will help with that, and then also introduce them to other aspects of the job that are interesting, and hopefully some of them will decide they want to do this. And then we've conducted a 6-month review of our contract with Green Hill and then the service that our new officers are providing. We're at a 93% live release rate for all the animals that we've seized and placed in the First Avenue shelter. The numbers are a little higher for dogs and a little lower for cats. And I'm not enough of an expert to tell you exactly why that is yet. And then the city manager committed to report back out to the community, and we're working on that now. I think that might be it. There you go.
Questions for the chief?
Because it's the last time you mentioned, Chief, you probably are aware of the string of emails about the First Avenue Kennel teething problems. And I know that's a contract and all that. I am curious about how the police commission is going to be involved on animal services, and if at some point we can get a better idea about what that looks like from your perspective. The email string that I'm talking about is pretty much from people that are concerned about the animal, because according to one commissioner, says there's a contract with certain folks there, so I don't know that the city may necessarily have much to do with it. Chief, are you able to share about the landlord training? What was that all about?
I don't have the details of it.
No. I could, I was there. It was just on a lot of talk on how to secure the area, clean brush away, have a loft in place. They had a woman from the rental agency talk a half an hour. They had a narcotics guy talk about how to spot illegal activities going on in the house. They talked about some of the new policies, that is, after the party houses, their new policy, if you own a house that has been visited and somebody has been ticketed 10 times in a year, you can be in trouble, which is, they talk about people who, let's say, party starters that don't control the situation, that they will follow the individual to, in other words, they'll track the individual and the house. And that's all that, it was very nice, and as I said, it was very, very packed, so they did a very nice job there.
A couple more things, if you don't mind. Chief, throughout your presentations, not just today, but in the past, I've noticed that the words mental health has come up quite a few times, and some of the officers that I talk to, they talk about that as well. Obviously, that's an overdue conversation that already is going on in the community. Hopefully, the city council will take on that in more detail. I know there's a couple of entities out there that, in fact, have begun some of their work. Centro Latino, for example, has a mental health clinic, and they already are busy. We are busy already. So that thing, I think, has to be spoken more, in fact, from your perspective, because your officers are more likely to encounter people that need that kind of assistance. So that has to be brought up to the public arena more, if you ask me. Now, I'm seeing there's a reduction on jail beds, and that's been going on for a while. I don't have to tell you this. But then, if there's a reduction in jail beds, therefore resources, do I expect an increase in community service, or is there a correlation? Community service instead of going to prison or going to jail?
Oh. No, the problem that the judges face is that anything they impose that doesn't include a sentence has a consequence of going to jail if they don't comply. So if someone is sentenced to community service and they don't meet the minimum requirements, the consequence is that they go to jail. They go to jail and they don't spend any time there. So there is no consequence presently for many people that are sentenced to those. But the judges don't, I think my sense is when I speak with them that they're being as creative as they can without to hold people accountable, without really having a jail system that they can rely on. Will there be more of that? I don't know. There isn't going to be more funding for those alternatives. And everything comes with an expense.
All right, thank you.
Claire and then Bob.
Yeah, Chief, my question was around traffic enforcement, and this comes from the fact that I was at the Whitaker Community Council meeting last night, and Tom Larson, the traffic engineer, was there talking about repaving of Blair and Fifth, and in the course of that conversation was concerns around traffic control and people speeding through Blair and Van Buren and the whole new Ninkasi and then Hot Valley and the brewery district that's developing there. And I've heard, since I've become a counselor, I've heard from folks in Whitaker complaints of a lack of traffic enforcement. And I know recently you deployed folks in the downtown area to do some enforcement. So I just wanted to take a couple minutes to kind of speak to how you decide where you're going to implement traffic enforcement and what goes into some of that decision.
You bet. You can see from our mapping that all of our data, all of our intelligence is driven towards these three property crimes. Nothing else. We don't have disorderly conduct. We don't have assault. We have the three things that we can afford to do. So we picked the crimes that are the most common here, that represent where our crime rate is way out of whack, and we focused on that. And we're only able to focus on those three crimes because it's all pencil and paper data collection. When we go to the new records management system, we'll be able to focus on more things. We've been doing data-led policing for a few years now. This year, I've asked that the department add traffic crashes to the types of things that it focuses its efforts on to reduce. So for many years, we've been mapping traffic crashes, and we've asked the traffic enforcement unit to overlay its work with where those crashes are, because the experience in the United States is that where you enforce traffic violations, and it really doesn't matter what you're enforcing, it will reduce crashes there. So if you're enforcing license plate lights, as long as you're enforcing it in a place where crashes happen, crashes will go down. And so we're going to refine our ability to bring the traffic enforcement unit's efforts and engineering and education to the places where they're needed the most based on crash rates. And to help with that, we just this last year started inputting the calls. When there's a crash out here, we'll get a dozen calls about a single crash because everybody has a cell phone now. It's so convenient for us. So we did it for a long time, enter those calls if it didn't necessitate a police response. Starting last year, we began entering those. It takes a little more time, but our data is much more accurate. So that's what we have going now. You'll see that we will be, our traffic enforcement unit and education and engineering will start to shift around the city a little more deliberately from this point on. And whether or not, and what an area like Nicasia or that Whitaker and Blair area might find is that you don't see more traffic enforcement if there aren't more crashes there.
Okay, thanks. So,
I have Bob, Jim, and then myself and you, Bob.
Thank you. This always reminds me when I see the chief stuff that I subscribe to anybody can to crimereports.com, which is, I'll show you the little map here. This is my neighborhood, and this is in the form of a comment, chief, because when you're showing it, I'm not seeing a lot of these that I get on crimereports.com. That's the proactive policing work that's going on based on the data-led policing. The officers found that if they start saturating a neighborhood where, and you can see all these, they're real tiny, but they're little gray spots here, and these are all proactive policing in my neighborhood, where the officers have stopped people who are coming through the neighborhood that aren't exactly, look like they fit in the neighborhood, or that they might be maybe looking in cars as they're walking down the street, trying to see what's inside them, and that type of thing. And they found that by saturating this area like that, they've cut crime in that particular area where they've had problems. So I've noticed that there's only one crime in my neighborhood now, theft, and that's it, since this has happened recently. The thieves, I guess, go somewhere else. But then the data-led policing takes them in that area. So hopefully that works for you. And it also works in the concern for traffic violations, because I noticed a couple of weeks ago that all up and down Jefferson in my neighborhood, there were lots of little T's, meant traffic stop, traffic stop, traffic stop. So what did that do? That made me slow down when I was going up Jefferson every morning. But it also showed me that they're paying attention to a problem we have on that street, and pedestrians and children trying to cross to get to the school on the other side of Jefferson, having to deal with these cars speeding through there. So this is instantaneous, and this is something you all can do. They'll even send you an email every so often to tell you about the updates, and you can keep up with what's going on in your neighborhood. CrimeReports.com. I don't have no staff in the company. No.
Thank you, Bob. Jim?
I know in the news they've been really emphasizing that it appears there's been some extra money allocated for overtime for the police to start really looking at some of the driving them while impaired, whether it's texting or not wearing a seatbelt correctly, or do you know about how many hours Eugene Police will be putting toward that?
No, but I can find out. We have a few grants that we use, that we participate in that fund that type of enforcement. I can get that for you if you like.
Okay. And I also heard, I don't know if I read or heard on the news that you had a joint session with the state police and EPD, and I think Springfield and Sheriff's Department to all get together and kind of did a joint test, some kind of
yeah, and that would have been a
little
grant.
bit more.
That would have been a grant-funded program also, and always precede those with media releases. So we tell the community that we're going to be doing a saturation enforcement on a certain violation. We did the same thing before. We did increased patrols in the downtown for pedestrian vehicle violations that lead to pedestrian crashes with pedestrians. And then we do the enforcement, and we do a follow-up, and we did the same with the DUII enforcement that weekend.
All right, so one last question. You talked about the porta plunge. Did you partake in plunging?
Oh, yeah.
Where was it at?
It's in that Maury Jacobs Park area where you see a lot of geese and ducks in the nice sloped area. The geese and ducks weren't there that day, but we were.
The stuff they leave behind was there.
It was very cold. Yeah, windy too.
That always helps
Yeah.
be cold too. Yeah.
It was a lot of fun.
Thanks.
Chief, my question is about the decoy cars. So you had in one of the slides, you had, I think it said in the barge area, 6 decoy cars. You probably told us about that before, but I don't remember what that is. Can you remind me what the decoy cars are?
We will, in order to slow traffic, we'll put old police cars, we'll park them in certain places, so that's probably what that was.
Yeah. If I remember correctly, last year's budget was about 46 million. And I guess we've been talking, the subject of grants has come up several times, and I was curious, how much more does that total in a typical year?
That's within that $45 million number.
Okay.
Jesse?
And more about grants. Would it be something that would be possible to put the grant applications that this EPD applies for in the materials that are emailed out to the commission, and periodic reports about how federal grant dollars, or grant dollars in general, are being used?
I don't think that would be much trouble, but if you'll let Carter and I look at what that would take. And of course, if you ask for it, we will provide it, but it might help you to know how much time that would require.
Thanks.
If I can suggest, maybe, depending on how much of a workload that is, maybe that could be a quarterly kind of thing. I think that would be too infrequent, but.
But let me look at it. It may not be all that amazing
I
list.
just an interesting request.
Yeah, glad to do it.
All right, if there's no more questions for the chief, that concludes the chief's report portion of our...
I was just going to add one thing. We don't have a drone or a drone.
I know.
I wish we did. But I think with
Nobody
certain restrictions, some surveillance is important.
Okay, so, 7:01, we have one agenda item left. Just because we have been sitting for a few minutes, let's take a 5-minute break, so we can come back and complete the last item on our, 2 items on our agenda, actually, and early. So 5 minutes. So please be back at 7:06. Oh, yes, and please remember the mic's still on during our break. Our session's still being recorded.
It's expanding my, it's real. And, expanding my.
Hey there, Carlos, how are you?
Fine, thank you. Person, I look at everything as how much it costs, and I don't, even when it takes me out to lunch.
I've been pretty busy. Days off there,
Oh, yeah, it's real good.
I'm keeping myself in trouble. Some of it, he goes through the videos. Very seldom do that. I stay awake through all the things. Some of the stuff.
better.
Somebody says on the winter months, it's not as busy. People are indoors more.
Football season doesn't get better and worse.
In the spring, it'll be busy again, but I think it's as bad as it's been. There's less riots. Because
It's only limited by... I haven't heard of anything big.
because we found techniques that reduce the likelihood, but we haven't seen it do it before. Not yet.
I've got a question. Do you have an estimate of
Oh, closet. Carter was hiding it.
I kept looking at tables, and there's nothing on tables.
police cost, including, at least how much meetings? Yes, but, we're friends. About what it costs for, and all things bringing in, for instance, the budget you have plus, and I'm gonna call I'm a businessman, so I always have to look at, the total cost of a police, an hour of police. And, that includes, all the supervisors, in other words, the maintenance on the building, the maintenance of the car, the depreciation of the car, and I don't know if you have any idea what that is.
Well, I guess the way to calculate it would be to take the $45 million budget, divide by 310 employees, or 185 sworn employees, and then by the number of hours in a year. I guess that's how you think.
Well, but does the budget include, for instance, the maintenance on this building? Does it include buying cars? Okay, so.
Yes, it does. Yep. We pay a monthly fee for each car, each computer, each telephone.
Okay.
Someday we're going to replace a car, the amount that we spend each month will help to pay for that.
So it would be.
Yeah, there's a way to get there.
So it's 45 divided by how many?
I guess you just divide it by the sworn.
Yeah, sworn officers was 185. I looked up on the website, I did this a while ago. We're using 46 million and 185 officers, which is what I found on the website.
Does that include you and the secretaries here?
Well, not the secretaries, but it includes me. So if you wanted to just have officers and the tech, it would be a different number. Probably 120 or so.
I don't think we have any decisions made, so I don't think so.
To get true business, you also have to do the backup of, but the secretaries and non-sworn come out of that.
45, yeah.
45 million, okay.
Yeah, that's a calculation that wouldn't be too hard to make.
Yeah, came out to $253,000
For each employee?
No, for each of the 185 that were on the street.
Say that again.
Okay. We got a $45 million budget,
Yeah,
185 officers on the street.
yeah.
Okay, came out to $253,000 per officer,
250.
which includes salary, benefits, training, supervision, equipment,
So
overhead.
about a quarter of a million.
Roughly.
Administrative staff, cars.
Yeah, records.
No, but there's no.
Yeah, the whole thing.
No, and I'm a businessman. You take what you pay them, and then you need to charge about 4 to 5 times that amount to keep the doors open in a business.
Yeah, so it would be a lot more than that 253 number, because the officers on the street are, I think there's 130 so. Yeah, so that's a big figure.
Thank you.
Includes insurance and risk, everything.
So we lost Bob and
I guess when Carlos decided to leave early too, but we only have one more agenda topic, and I don't think it's a decision-making one, so we no longer have a quorum, so we can no longer,
Here, I'll play Juan Carlos on this.
Yes, you be Juan Carlos then. You like to...
And Linda insisted, when I talked to her, she said, "Oh, yeah, I'm going to be here."
Yeah. We have some challenges. I think we have clerk roll too.
Me being the misser of meetings, I can't give anyone else a hard time for that.
As soon as Carter comes back, we'll start.
Okay.
Carter!
And this mic too.
Yeah, that's what I said. Yeah.
And they have these big raspberry flavored M&Ms in honor of Valentine's Day.
What's today? Oh, yeah, it's Valentine's Day. Hey, Bethany, how are you? Oh, just fine.
And Darrell was not happy.
Yeah, well, and hopefully we're going to be done here in 2 minutes. And then people will be pleasantly surprised.
Hopefully you won't go home and be like, "You're home early."
I think it was working out tonight anyways. Since we went out last night, so.
I I did my work. I had to do it early today. Okay. If everybody's ready to reconvene, the last item on our agenda is the update and discussion on the Downtown Public Safety Committee. And we had our first meeting, you challenged me to think of the date, February
in our notes here.
4th, is that right?
January 25th.
Okay, January 25th.
You also had a meeting on the 1st.
Well, no, you didn't.
No, we
Wasn't
had
the
one
25th.
meeting so far.
That's right, it was
In our
later than
packet
that.
it says-
It was the 4th, yeah,
February 1st.
because it was a Monday.
So that was, well, at some point, you recently had a meeting.
Friday,
I don't know what day it was.
the first Friday in February.
Oh, yeah, so that would have been February 1st.
Yep.
Okay, and at that meeting, I think there are, it seems like 15-ish people on the committee from a wide, diverse group of the community, representing different segments of the population. We had a gentleman, for example, from sponsors. Carl Durr, he's the captain, Durr was there. Judge Allen, to name a few. Actually, we have a community member, I think it's Jesse's wife, on that committee, so that's good. And amongst various other folks. I apologize, I can't name them all off. But anyway, the first meeting, and you do have some materials in your packet, was mainly for introductions, the introduction of the topic, to review the UPSC zone regulations and intent, the data. And you guys received a section of the data in your packet. If you would like the full, did you get it in the Friday packet, the full?
I got the email.
Yeah, the email. It has I made the mistake of printing it out. It was 60 pages. So you did receive it in the full packet of the materials that we received in one of Carter's Friday updates, either this last week or the week before. But if you want to print it out, be careful. It's 60 pages. This is a good cross-section of the data that and presentation that Carter provided in the packet here. And I don't know if you've had a chance to look at that. There were a lot of repeat offenders. There were a lot of good comments in the group about the subject matter. Everybody, it's really obvious that everybody there wants to solve the problem. What that solve is going to be is going to be interesting to see. But everybody genuinely seems like they're willing to participate in the group and are interested in exploring options. So that's a good thing. And everybody was very cordial in the first meeting. It'd be interesting to see if that continues. We have our second meeting in March, and our third meeting is scheduled in April. And so we'll have 6 meetings total before we have to make a report back to the city manager. So that's expected to conclude before the end of the fiscal year, before June 30th. And there were a lot of folks in the group that noticed that a lot of the crimes that are committed downtown that have received exclusions are centered around either mental health issues or drugs or alcohol. As you may have expected, that if that's borne out in the data, if you want to look at the larger subset, it should be in that Friday email. If you no longer have that and want to email me, and I'll forward it to you again. I'd be happy to do that. So, given that the charge is to find a path to end the DPSC, it'll be with no money, of course, and no jail beds. That'll be a very interesting discussion, and it'll be interesting to see what happens. There might be jail beds. You're right, there might be jail beds. Yeah, that would.
Just says no, there won't be.
The most interesting point for me was actually one of the things that the chief said in the meeting, and chief, correct me if I state this incorrectly, which was that there was no evidence, not clear evidence that the DPSC had an impact on crime, which I found a little surprising because I had not expected to hear that. I had expected to hear that and You should probably clarify that for the group too, because I'm probably saying a portion of what you said that was a larger point. Do you mind telling the group what that was?
Yeah, it's a tricky thing to describe. It's really hard in law enforcement to draw a causal relationship between one thing and another. And so we know that we enforce the downtown public safety zone, but crime has so many different influences than just that one thing. And what we were consistently asked what we have been consistently asked during the period of the downtown public safety zone is, can you show that it has reduced crime? No, that's virtually impossible. What the officers know, though, is that when a person is excluded, they're not in the downtown public safety zone committing crimes. Some violate it, and we know that people on parole and probation violate their parole and probation also, and we know that some people run stoplights and red lights. You know, you'll never entirely stop anything from happening, but for the most part, when a person is excluded, they are not committing crimes downtown. But what's that say about the crime rate downtown? You cannot draw a line from one to the other.
Thanks for clarifying that. I couldn't say it that well. So we've had that first meeting, and I'll be reporting back regularly to you about and making sure that you get all the same materials that I get as part of that meeting. There wasn't too much that really went on other than, a few comments here and there as far as, talking about certain options. I mean, we did have folks ask about, what about another Cahoots van or some things like that. But I'll report back to you about anything else that goes on in the meeting. But I wanted to know as well as if any of you wanted to tell me anything that you think about it, or any suggestions that you have, so that I can make sure that I carry that message back to the group as well. So if anybody has anything for me, I'd be happy to listen.
I don't know if I have anything for you to take back to the group, but is someone from Whitebird on that committee, do you know? Chuck Gerard or?
Not sure.
No, Lane County Mental Health.
Okay. Because I guess one question, if I was serving on the committee, one question I would ask is, how has that the second Cahoots van, what kind of effect does that have, or what kind of value, has that been an effective strategy, or how has that strategy played out, I guess? And that might not just be a question for Cahoots, but a question for the EPD officers who interact with Cahoots as well. Because I think it seems kind of obvious to me that no matter what strategy you come up with, that's going to be part of it, is having that access there, and hopefully we'll have the funding for it. Joe?
Yeah, actually, I was there for the meeting, and we videotaped it, and so I guess the DVDs can be made available if anybody's interested in it. But there were some comments that came from people. There was a fair number of people who attended, and a couple of the comments were that there is no one from the homeless community sitting on this committee. That essentially there's a lot of privilege, unacknowledged privilege, among the people who were there and who were, members of the committee. And so it would be nice if the group did at least hear from, to bring some of these people in, hear from people in the homeless community about what their experiences are downtown, and maybe get some ideas from them about what it is that would make them essentially go away, which is largely what the issue is, as I see it, is clearing the downtown of the homeless. So it's just my suggestion is that if you can get some input from the homeless community, there's a number of different segments for that. There's street kids, there's some veterans, a couple people who might be considered at least semi-leaders in that area. But probably the person to talk to who would be able to suggest people would certainly be Allie. She could she can give you a handle on who's, emerged in a sort of leadership role within that community at this point.
I probably won't be making that suggestion because that suggestion's already been made. It was made by, I think, several people that were members of the public attending, but I will make sure that I keep track of that.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize it because we don't want it to get lost, because I think that that's a valuable input to this process.
Okay. Well, if you think of anything, the meetings are open to the public. I'm sure Carter puts those in her Friday updates to the Police Commission, and if you want to attend, that would be great. If not, then I'll be reporting back to you. It's great that Joe offered about making a DVD so you can see it firsthand if you'd like it but can't attend. And if you do think of anything or have comments on anything that comes out, please let me know. Please send me an email. So,
Thank you, Tamara, for
Yeah.
serving on that.
sure. My pleasure. Okay, if there's no other thoughts or comments on that, then that concludes our agenda, and that means that we will be getting out early on Valentine's Day. So we will have some happier spouses. Thank you for attending.
Closing comments?
Oh, sorry, closing comments.
She's ready to
Sorry,
go.
I was so trying to leave, I forgot. Okay, closing comments. Let's start with Jim.
I think I'll pass.
Okay.
Valentine's Day.
Well, actually, a couple things. First of all, I want to bring up the documentary West of Memphis again, which is just exceptional. It will be playing at the Bijou shortly, and probably should be attended. And again, if anybody wants copies of this, it's the cover. I scanned the cover and back page of a book called In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, which examines the issue of how is it that addicts come into existence, and what's the effectiveness of various attempts to treat them, etc. I gave a copy to Chief Kearns. I read the book. I think it's exceptional. It's really very well written.
Who's it written by?
Yeah, the guy's name is Gabor Mate. He's a medical doctor who is working in a place in Vancouver that houses the mentally ill and drug addicts and the like, and just really very well done. I did prepare some remarks, but it was mostly in response to an argument I got into with Bob. I gave him printed copies. There's, I don't know, I think there's some value to actually looking at this, because the second half was the question of, because if you break the homeless into its subcategories, each one of them essentially has a reason why they're on the street and how they got there. And the thing I was going to, I'll let you off the hook. Maybe we can send it out in your weekly packet or something. But this one I watched because I was living in a group house about 3 years ago, and one of the roommates' sister and brother-in-law showed up, and they went from the American dream to her getting diagnosed with cancer to she had surgery and the like, and then the hospital called them in and said, oops, we admitted you, the card said okay, the insurance company verified, etc., and they're not going to pay. So you now have about $150,000 in hospital bills that you owe us. And to top it off, about a month later, his company moves to China. So they wound up getting foreclosed on. They packed up their possessions and came to Eugene, and they slept in the car because the owner of the house said you can't sleep in the house, in the driveway. About 4 days later, the landlord said, excuse me, you can't sleep in the driveway. The second night that they were on the street in Eugene, the police found them and confiscated the car and all of their possessions. And not only that, but he was stupid enough to argue. And so his face was all bruised and cut up because they slammed him into the pavement. And he then had a court date for resisting arrest and now has a criminal record, which of course is not going to help him while he's looking for work, which in fact he was actively doing at the time in Eugene. Now, sleeping in the car is against the law. Okay? They did commit a crime. Okay? It is about their bad behavior. That was part of the argument I had with Bob. Okay? The officers acted within policy. They upheld the law. Okay? Are these people criminals? Okay? Is this community better off because we made them completely destitute? Okay? And I think that's something that we need to look at, because that's a story that you find within the homeless community with some regularity. So, you know, once they're down to zero, then, you know, they begin to, you know, experience the system, which sleep deprivation, lots of hostile interactions, which of course they come right back. You know, the more hostily they've been treated, the more hostile they are. And it's a downward spiral that I don't think can be solved by more police. I think there need to be alternative solutions to start dealing with taking these people off the bottom and bringing them up at some level. And I would hope that this, you know, not just this committee, but, you know, the police commission, but possibly the Downtown Public Safety Zone Committee, or Chief Kearns, or anyone else, just tell the city that we can't win this war against the homeless. I believe that as soon as someone in a, you know, a position of authority, or a group in a position of authority, makes that statement, that we have the opportunity to start implementing better solutions. And, you know, following the discussion with Bob, it's just like really clear that that's what I want from this group, is for people to understand that and to bring about a change that brings us more effective, lower cost, more humane solutions to these particular problems. And yes, I admit that a lot of the homeless, I mean, we had them at the Occupy camp, man, some of them are real assholes. But the bottom line is, when they start sleeping a little bit, they become saner. I mean, it was just astounding, the change in a lot of people that we had at the camp over a 6-week period, simply because they were no longer sleep deprived. And I think that that's the solution to your problem. You're not going to get them out of the downtown unless you give them a place to exist. That's my 2 cents. Thank you for listening.
And Joe, glad meeting you, Mr. Yang. I'm Mr. Yang.
Okay.
The balance things, by the way, for your information, homeless, I have a place on 1488 West 7th, on Hibachi, in front of a grill, in front of a homeless van. That went through my front window. I had an interaction, and by the way, I'm very polite. I had an interaction with them that the guy threatened me, and I'm very polite. I asked him for the second time to move away, and I have to pay a guy to clean up and I mean, by the way, when I need to use the bathroom, I need to use the bathroom, I understand. But there's costs, and it's real frustrating cleaning up feces. I mean, it really is. So
I understand.
And one of the things I don't think this society understands, no one understands, nonprofits are a wonderful thing. I'm on 3 or 4 boards, but as of donating to the big coffer called property tax, that doesn't happen. So, and I mean, by the way, I know Jack down at Eugene Mission, heck of a guy, but the cost, I don't know what the cost is, but I think it's greater than anyone could even imagine. And I understand, by the way, I was homeless for 6-8 months. I lived on an e-web lawn. The guys would come and turn on the sprinklers and laugh as they, you know, would get us wet. And, you know, so maybe I have some understanding. That was a number of years ago. So, you know, I think a good balance is the most important things. If you have the yin, you should have the yang. And so it's going to be so much fun working with you. I'm going to appreciate that.
Great, thank you.
All right, we're getting off. Off and running. So to Joe's point, and George's point, the city council, we do have, I don't know when it'll happen, but a poll has been taken of city councilors to have a work session on the question of modifying the ban on camping, of sleeping in public spaces, which I assume would also look at the ban on sleeping in cars. I don't know when that work session will happen. If it does happen, I would hope that both of you would come and give input to that process, because I do think there is a real balance that needs to be struck, and maybe we're out of balance right now because we do have people in real desperate straits who don't necessarily have other options. And criminalizing them for being in that situation doesn't make a lot of sense. But I, too, have had people living in their cars in front of my house and experienced, actually, just as I came to this meeting, a gentleman urinating in the middle of the sidewalk 2 houses down from me, and if I wasn't late, I would have confronted him about it. But, so...
You gotta go, I understand.
Not something I enjoy either. But people are people, and we have, biological needs and distress. So... I think it will be a difficult conversation. Some of the counselors don't even want to entertain the topic. But I think there's enough folks in the community who want us to discuss it at least, whether or not we make any changes. So, Juan Carlos talked about mental health issues. That's definitely part of it, but some of it's just economic issues. And I know that I think it was Peter Courtney who made a big statement about looking for more resources for mental health support for people. I don't know if that'll go anywhere. Money is a real issue, and that's what it'll take. It'll be shifting some priorities in terms of how we spend money in terms of the state. So I look forward to grappling with these things with you as well.
It seems like attendance, has become an issue over several months. I'm going to ask the chair and vice chair to consider ways to deal with that.
Thank you. We'd be happy to. I'll make sure Caitlin and I have that discussion. Thanks. Carter, do you have any closing comments? I don't have anything. Chief, do you have anything else to say?
Nothing more than you said.
Okay. All right. Thank you for coming. And that concludes our closing comments, and have a great evening.
And it was nice meeting you all. Thank you for being so polite.
Usually the commissioner is polite.
Pardon?
Usually the commissioner is polite. Sometimes people make public comment. Yeah.
Oh,
Suggested.
Not referring to just in terms of meeting things.
well, everybody gets frustrated with the system, whatever system it is.
It seemed like there was something. I just wanted to,
I was going to suggest that, and then I figured.
Yeah, that's it's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
If I needed to move.
I don't know where.
Right.
Boy, that area is really coming alive.